thing was that once you make the statement that access needs to be protected, and then you respond that these are the vehicles for protecting access, the conversation took an interesting turn. The next question was, if that's for low-income students, what are you going to do for the middle class?
Well, interesting though, because as everybody knows, four-year education is becoming an astronomical thing. $20,000, $30,000 to go to a private university. And the main concern is that state schools for in-state kids remains affordable, of course, and more people from the middle class are actually seeking that kind of education.
Absolutely.
As the caliber goes up. I should disclose the personal connection that I have. My father's a former dean, and he still works at SUNY New Paltz.
And a great colleague, I might add.
He's, you know, I have some insight into this,
right.
And I think that there's a great concern about, certainly even the middle class kids can't afford the tuition either.
Well, I think when you talk about tuition and the cost of college, you always have to unpack it. This is always true with every story. Our tuition at the moment is $4,970 for the year. Now, that's not the end all. We know that there are residence costs, there are textbook costs, which we're working to break down and to curb, but that still is an incredible value. And if you add the tuition assistance program to that for Pell eligible students, we are still looking at a high quality, affordable education, which is the hallmark of the State University of New York.
Let's talk for a second about Bill Stokowski.
Okay.
You said in a Buffalo News interview that he was among the champions of that. He really held out.
He did.
And there's been an argument made from people who are supportive of SUNY empowerment that had he not drawn this line in the sand and said, I will not vote for the revenue bill that enables the budget to get passed, holding up everyone getting paid, including himself, of course, that this never would have been risen to the, you and I probably would not have this conversation had Bill Stokowski, one might argue, made such a big deal. And then all of a sudden, though, he, for whatever reason, decided that he had had enough and stopped, and he's now being lambasted by his primary challenger, Tim Kennedy. You think that he did the right thing in making the decision that he did?
Well, you know, throughout the process, and you and I know, this went on from January forward. As soon as the governor introduced the budget bill, we were all over it. We had been a partner in crafting the empowerment language that went into the budget bill. So we've been at this for 6, 7, almost 8 months of really hard advocacy. And so there were a lot of people throughout the process who were supportive, who liked a piece of the legislation, maybe not all of it. I think even when the Senate looked at this as a separate bill and separate language in the waning days, it was Toby Stavisky who introduced and supported and advocated, and Mr. Sampson from the Senate leadership was certainly an advocate as well. In the end, it's about the votes. And that's what Senator Stokowski did. He withheld his vote. And others joined him. We heard then from Brian Foley.
Yep.
And from Senator Breslin, and from other people who appreciated the fact that Senator Stokowski was standing tall. It didn't happen in a nanosecond. It happened over a period of time, because first there was the appropriations bill.
I remember.
Then there was the revenue bill. Then there was the possibility of separate language. Then there was the pressure of people's living wage being withheld. So I end where I began. I think he was heroic.
The interesting thing, though, is did you watch that final night? I don't know how much of it you were able to see when it came up to the floor and then they pulled it back because it didn't have votes and they didn't want it to fail. Then it came up to the floor again and they pulled it back.
This is the separate bill
right,
for the
correct.
Empowerment
On the final,
right.
Because the governor tried to embed it in the revenue
Yes,
bill,
right.
et cetera. Right. So, you know, it illustrates this sort of unfortunate and unusual situation going on in the Senate, that one individual can really hold the rest of his or her colleagues hostage.
Well, when you have such a fine line margin, this can happen. There were other people who threatened to withhold their votes.
On other issues.
On other issues.
Correct.
In the best of all worlds, this would not be the way we would legislate this outcome. It's a very complex set of reforms. And my optimism is embedded in the fact that we will be back. We will have this discussion. It'll be in September. It'll be in November. It'll be in January. Whenever the timeline, the political timeline emerges, we are going to be very clear about what this bill really meant. I think people were confused. Why was it in the budget bill? Well, because it was about revenue.
Right.
And quite frankly, as you know, the immense nature of the cuts we have incurred really argued for some way for SUNY to generate revenues, not just on tuition. Tuition was a part of this, but procurement, efficiencies, which would save us money, and public-private partnerships, which would make us money, were ways that we could curb the effects of 30% cuts over 3 years.
Do you think then that the argument became muddied, that perhaps it could have been sold in a better way or a more straightforward way, and on that same point, when you go forward, how will you change your approach in trying to get some of these people who were holding out on board with you going forward?
Well, I think there are several areas where there were misunderstandings or counter-arguments put forward that really didn't accurately reflect what we were asking for. For instance, in the 30-year history of legislative tuition, the average has been about 5.9%. We were going to come under that. Our most recent agreed upon compromise was 4% for in-state undergraduate residents. So I don't think people understood that. This notion that this would curb access to any of our campuses, I don't think people understood that we had a solution to that issue. I don't think in the argument that this would that the legislature would lose control over tuition, they understand that the legislature was going to set a cap. In public-private partnerships, that there would be an asset management board that would be composed of legislative representation. So, A, be real clear about what the act involves. I know that it's hard to hold 3 things in place, but it was only 3. We talked about it tirelessly as a 3-legged stool. Be real clear about our commitment to protect access. Be equally clear about the payoff for New York. I mean, we're in a revenue freefall, $9 billion in debt, and maybe the same debt next year.
Yep.
Maybe growing, as Lieutenant Governor Ravitch explained, to as high as $60 billion. We need a solution to New York's recovery.
Before I let you go, let me just ask you, do you think that Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver can move on this?
I'm hopeful that he can. You know, I'm just getting to know all these people. I don't have the long history, but I have to believe that the facts will prevail and that we can find that perfect compromise.
Well, welcome to your trial by fire, Chancellor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's great to talk to you.